I am Darcy J. Sterling, a logistics designer who knows that a single system failure can trigger a total collapse. And my collapse began with the sound of a flatline. I woke up to the clinical hum of the ICU and the sight of my sister Peyton leaning over my bed with a look of pure, filtered annoyance. You really had to wreck the car today, Darcy, and ruin my entire filming schedule for a few bruises, she snapped while adjusting her designer coat. I tried to gasp for air, my lungs feeling like they were crushed under $10,000 of heavy debris. But my mother Brenda didn't even look up from her phone. Stop being so dramatic. The doctors said you're stable and we've been waiting here for hours, Brenda muttered, her thumb never stopping its restless scrolling. Peyton's eyes flicked to the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, her face twisting into a mask of jagged irritation as she hissed. This sound is making my head explode. And we all know you're faking this intensity for sympathy. Before I could process the movement, her hand shot out and violently ripped the power cord from the wall. The screen went dark. The pulse died. And the room fell into a silence that felt final and terrifying. There. Now we can have some peace, since you want to play the victim anyway, Peyton said. Crossing her arms with a smirk, I struggled to breathe, my chest seizing in terror as the heavy door swung open and a nurse rushed in with eyes like cold flint. Step away from that bed immediately, the nurse commanded, her hand already hitting the security alert on her radio. Peyton stepped back, her voice rising into a shrill defense as she yelled, I was just silencing a noisy machine. She's fine. Don't you dare touch me. The nurse ignored her, slamming the plug back into the socket and checking my vitals while stating firmly into her collar. Security, to ICU. I have a deliberate interference with life support and 2 hostile individuals. My mother finally stood up, her face a pale mask of performative concern as she stammered. This is just a misunderstanding. We're a family. Please don't make a scene. The nurse didn't flinch, looking directly at the police officers entering the hallway and saying, Tell it to them. Because you're not leaving this floor. The heavy thud of tactical boots echoed against the linoleum as Officer Miller stepped into the room, her hand resting firmly on her belt as she surveyed the chaos. Step away from the patient and keep your hands where I can see them, she commanded, her voice cutting through Peyton's panicked shriek like a serrated blade. Peyton fumbled with her designer bag, her face flushing a guilty crimson as she stammered, Officer, you don't understand. I was just fixing a noisy machine because my sister is clearly faking her distress. The officer didn't blink, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from her belt and stating, Interfering with life support equipment is a felony in this state. And I have a medical witness who watched you pull the cord. My mother Brenda rushed forward, her voice trembling with a forced, fragile sweetness as she pleaded, Please. She's just an emotional girl who's had a very long day. Surely we can settle this without ruining her future over a little mistake. Officer Miller's partner, a man with a jaw like granite, moved to block Brenda's path and replied, A mistake is a spilled coffee. Ma'am, pulling a power cord on a trauma patient is an assault. So back up or you're going to jail for obstruction. I watched from the bed, my chest burning as the nurse adjusted my oxygen flow. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the problem they needed to solve. Peyton began to wail, the sound jagged and ugly, as she shouted, Darcy, tell them it was a joke. Tell them you're fine so we can just go home and forget this ever happened. I looked her directly in the eye, my voice a dry, rasping whisper that felt like grinding glass as I said, The machine recorded everything. Peyton. And so did I. Brenda hissed under her breath. You ungrateful child. After everything we've done for you, you're really going to let them take your sister away? The male officer didn't wait for another word. turning Peyton around and clicking the metal cuffs shut with a finality that made the room feel suddenly, blissfully quiet. "You have the right to remain silent, and I suggest you start using it right now," he muttered as he began to lead her toward the door. Brenda followed them into the hallway, her voice rising in a frantic, manipulative pitch as she yelled, "I'm calling our lawyer. This is a violation of our rights, and Darcy will pay for the $2,000 bail herself." I lay back against the thin hospital pillow, listening to the fading rhythm of their footsteps and the steady, uninterrupted beep of my heart monitor. The nurse squeezed my hand gently and whispered, "They're gone, Darcy. And they aren't coming back in here tonight." I closed my eyes, the cold logic of my new reality settling in, knowing that the $5,000 in damages to my car was nothing compared to the price they were about to pay for their cruelty. The morning sun filtered through the blinds like jagged glass as Dr. Eris walked in, his face set in a hard, professional grimace that told me the nightmare wasn't over. He sat down heavily and tapped a thick digital tablet, saying, "Darcy, we have a serious breach of protocol to discuss regarding your sister's actions while you were unconscious." I tightened my grip on the bed rail, the $5,000 debt for my ruined car, suddenly feeling like the least of my worries as I asked, "What did Peyton do this time?" "Doctor." Aris sighed and showed me the log, explaining, "She attempted to override your privacy settings twice by claiming she was your primary legal proxy with full medical power of attorney." I felt the familiar chill of her manipulation as I whispered, "She was trying to get control of my discharge papers so I'd be forced into her custody." "Wasn't she?" He nodded grimly and added, "It goes deeper. She told the night staff that you have a long history of seeking prescription narcotics and suggested we skip your scheduled pain management." I felt a surge of cold fury at the thought of her trying to leave me trapped in agony just to feed her narrative of my instability. She wanted me too broken to speak for myself when the police asked for my statement, I said, the logic of her cruelty clicking into place like a deadbolt. "Doctor." Eris leaned closer and stated firmly, "The hospital's legal department has already flagged this as an attempt to interfere with medical care. And we have the recorded calls of her impersonating you." I looked at the digital logs and replied, "Keep every single timestamp, Doctor, because I'm going to need them when I file for a permanent restraining order." The room felt small as the weight of their betrayal settled in. But I was no longer the passive victim they expected me to be. "Has my mother tried to access these files too?" I asked, knowing Brenda's subtle tactics were often more dangerous than Peyton's outbursts. "Doctor." Eris checked the system again and said, "Your mother, Brenda, didn't try to hack the portal. But she was caught on camera mocking the nursing staff for playing along with your injuries." I let out a sharp, bitter laugh that made my ribs ache, realizing they were already building a world where my pain was just a performance. They aren't just family anymore, they are liabilities in a system they can't control. I muttered, staring at the blinking cursor on the screen. "Doctor." Aris stood up and concluded, "I've locked your chart behind a security code only I and your lead nurse possess. So you are safe from them here." I reached for my phone, which was finally sitting in a plastic bag on the bedside table, and saw the flurry of missed messages. Peyton had sent a text saying, "You're ruining the family name over a $2,000 bail fee that you're going to pay back the second you're out." Brenda's message was even colder, stating, "Stop this nonsense with the doctors before we are forced to tell everyone the truth about your mental health." I didn't reply to either of them. Instead, I took a screenshot of the hospital's security log and sent it directly to my Uncle Garrett. "They're trying to rewrite my medical history to steal my autonomy," I wrote, my fingers steady despite the pain. Garrett's reply came back almost instantly. "Don't say another word to them. I'm filing the emergency injunction now." I logged into my banking app with trembling fingers, But the data on the screen hit me harder than the accident ever could. The joint logistics account I shared with my mother for family operations was sitting at a pathetic $800. A ghost of the $15,000 that should have been there to cover my recovery. Where is the money? Brenda? I hissed into the phone as soon as she picked up. My voice cold and surgical. Brenda didn't even skip a beat. Her tone dripping with a defensive, hollow pride as she replied, "We needed that money for Peyton's legal retainers and to maintain the family's image while you were busy playing the martyr." I felt a bitter laugh catch in my throat as I stated, "That wasn't your money to take. And using my medical fund to pay for the sister who tried to kill me is a new low even for you." Before I could hang up, a high-priority notification from my life insurance provider flashed across the top of my screen, making my stomach drop into a dark abyss. I opened the email to find a rejected request for an emergency change to my primary beneficiary. An attempt to replace my estate with Brenda Sterling's name. "You tried to change my $500,000 policy while I was still in the ICU. Didn't you?" I asked. The sheer audacity of the move, making the air in the room feel thin. Brenda's silence on the other end was heavy. Until she finally whispered, "It was just a precaution. Darcy. Because we didn't know if you were going to make it, and someone had to protect the family assets." I gripped the phone until my knuckles turned white, replying, "You weren't protecting assets. You were betting on my death before my body was even cold." I ended the call and immediately dialed my Aunt Martha at the bank, my mind shifting into full-scale defensive logistics. "Martha, I need a total lockout on every account associated with my Social Security number. Now," I commanded, my voice steadying as the adrenaline took over. Martha gasped on the other line, her voice filled with a professional horror as she replied, "Darcy, I'm looking at the logs and someone just tried to use your digital signature to authorize a $3,000 transfer to a private PayPal account." I closed my eyes, the betrayal coming in waves of calculated theft, and told her, "Block it, flag it as fraud, and send the IP address to Uncle Garrett immediately." Martha tapped away at her keyboard, her voice firm as she promised, "I'm locking them out of the entire system, and they won't be able to touch a single cent of your $25,000 savings." The realization that they had been planning my financial ruin while I was fighting for my life was the final gear that shifted my perspective. I sat in the dim light of the hospital room, the blue glow of my phone illuminating a path of destruction I never thought my own mother would pave. They didn't just pull the plug on the machine, I whispered to the empty room. They tried to pull the plug on my entire future. I knew then that my recovery wouldn't be complete until every bridge between us was burned to the ground and the ashes were scattered. I sent one final text to the family group chat: "The accounts are dead. The policy is locked. And the police have the fraud logs. Don't bother coming back for seconds." The first night back in my own house felt like living inside a hollow drum, every creak of the floorboards echoing the $5,000 worth of security upgrades I'd just installed. I sat on the floor behind the kitchen island, staring at the live feed on my phone as a pair of headlights suddenly washed over my driveway at midnight. Peyton stepped out of the car, her face twisted into a snarl as she marched toward my porch and shouted, "Darcy, open this door right now before I make you regret every lie you told the police." I watched through the wide-angle lens as she picked up a heavy decorative brick from my garden bed, weighing it in her hand like a weapon. My mother Brenda followed her, not to stop her, but to lean into the doorbell and say, "We know you're in there. And we aren't leaving until you sign the papers to drop the charges and restore our access." I hit the intercom button on my phone, my voice coming through the porch speaker with a cold, digital clarity that made them both jump. "The police have been notified and they are exactly 4 minutes away. So I suggest you put that brick back down. Peyton," I commanded, my heart hammering against my bruised ribs. Peyton didn't back off. She stepped closer to the camera and hissed, You think these little toys protect you. But you're still the weak little girl who can't survive without us. I didn't blink as I watched her raise the brick, replying calmly. I'm the girl who has a cloud-synced recording of you committing aggravated stalking and attempted breaking and entering. Brenda pulled at Peyton's arm, her voice rising in a panicked whisper as she said, Peyton, stop. She's actually recording this, and we can't afford another $2,000 in legal fees if they catch us here. A third figure appeared at the edge of the frame. A man in a dark hoodie I didn't recognize, standing near the sidewalk and watching my front door with a terrifying, silent focus. Who is the man in the hoodie? Brenda. Did you bring a locksmith or a hitman to your own daughter's house? I asked, my voice trembling with a surge of pure adrenaline. Brenda looked toward the street and stammered into the intercom. He's just a friend who's helping us ensure we get what's rightfully ours. Darcy. Don't be so dramatic. I saw the man take a step toward the porch, his phone pressed to his ear as he muttered my name, prompting me to tell them. The silent alarm is already silent no more. I hear the sirens turning onto the block. Peyton dropped the brick with a dull thud and scrambled back toward the car, screaming, This isn't over. Darcy. You can't lock us out of our own lives forever. The blue and red lights flooded the street just as their tires screeched against the pavement, the officers pulling them over before they could even clear the driveway. I stayed on the floor, watching the screen as Officer Miller forced Peyton against the hood of the car and said, I told you to stay away. And now you're going to see what a real jail cell looks like. Brenda was wailing in the background about family loyalty, but I just watched the man in the hoodie vanish into the shadows of the neighbor's yard. I scrolled back through the footage, saving the clip of the stranger's face and sending it to Uncle Garrett with a one-word message, Identify. My house was a fortress of wires and glass, and as the sirens faded into the distance, I realized that for $15,000, I hadn't just bought security, I had bought the evidence of their total moral collapse. The air in Aunt Martha's living room was thick with the scent of bitter coffee and inevitable ruin as Uncle Garrett laid the forensic audit papers on the mahogany table. Peyton stormed into the room, her face a mask of desperate arrogance as she shouted, I don't know why we're being treated like criminals when Darcy is the one who turned a family squabble into a police report. Uncle Garrett didn't even look up from his files, his voice a cold slab of granite as he replied, We're here because you stole $15,000 from a joint business account and tried to forge a life insurance signature while your sister was in a coma. Brenda slammed her purse down and hissed, It was for the family. Garrett. And Darcy is being ungrateful by hoarding $25,000 in savings while her own sister faces legal fees she caused. I leaned forward, my voice steady and surgical as I told her, That money was earned, not gifted. And you used my trauma as an opportunity to plunder my future. Peyton scoffed and paced the floor, her heels clicking like a countdown as she barked, You're just a bitter logistics clerk who thinks she's better than us because she can lock a bank account. I looked her directly in the eye and said, I'm the logistics designer who just tracked the $3,000 you sent to that friend in the hoodie to intimidate me at my own front door. The room went silent as Garrett pushed a final document toward Brenda, stating firmly, I am exercising my power as trustee to freeze the Sterling Family Trust and remove both of you from the LLC effective immediately. Brenda's face drained of color as she stammered, You can't do that. We rely on those $4,000 monthly dividends to survive. Garrett. You're making us homeless. Garrett adjusted his glasses and replied, You violated the moral turpitude clause the moment you pulled that hospital power cord. And frankly, you're lucky I'm not handing this entire folder to the district attorney. Peyton lunged for the papers, but Aunt Martha blocked her with a look of pure disgust, saying, Touch those and I'll have security drag you out of this house like the thief you've become. I watched them crumble, their power evaporating the second the cash flow was cut off. and realized they never loved me. They just loved the access I provided. Is this what you wanted? Darcy. To see your mother and sister begging for scraps? Brenda cried. Her manipulation failing to find a target for the first time in 20 years. I stood up, my bruised ribs aching but my mind clear, and told her I wanted a family. But since I got a pair of predators instead, I'll settle for the $15,000 you're going to pay back in court. Peyton screamed that I was a monster. But I simply turned my back on her as I whispered, No. I'm just the person who finally closed the account on both of you. Garrett stood by the door, signaling the end of the meeting as he said, The restraining orders are being served at your residences within the hour. So I suggest you leave before the sheriff arrives. Brenda tried to grab my arm one last time, her voice a pathetic whimper as she asked, How could you do this to your own blood? Darcy. After everything I sacrificed, I didn't flinch, looking her in the eye as I replied, You sacrificed my life for a $500,000 insurance payout. Brenda, the blood in my veins is mine, and you're never touching it again. They were escorted out into the cold Seattle rain, leaving behind a trail of broken promises and the heavy silence of a system that had finally been balanced. I sat back down, watching the rain blur the world outside, knowing that the $5,000 car was gone but my life was finally under my own command. Before the sun could even burn through the heavy Seattle fog, I packed the final $3,000 worth of my belongings into a single suitcase and walked away from the house that had become a battlefield. There was no goodbye tour. No dramatic final speech. Just the quiet click of a deadbolt and the cold certainty that Brenda and Peyton would never find my new zip code. I handed the spare keys to Uncle Garrett and whispered, The logistics of my life are finally private again. And I want to keep it that way. He nodded, his eyes reflecting a deep, protective pride as he replied, The restraining order is a fortress. Darcy, if they even type your name into a search engine, my legal team will know. I got into the car, driving south toward a small city where the air smelled of pine and no one knew the Sterling family name or the $500,000 bounty they had placed on my head. My new apartment was a minimalist sanctuary of white walls and silence, a far cry from the cluttered chaos of my mother's manipulation. I sat on the floor of my living room, watching the shadows lengthen, and realized that for the first time in 27 years, I didn't have to brace for an impact. Aunt Martha called me on an encrypted line and asked, How does the silence feel? Honey, is it too much? I looked at the $15,000 recovery check sitting on my new table and replied, It feels like air. Martha, it feels like the first breath I've taken since the accident. I started a new remote position for a firm in Chicago, my identity buried behind layers of corporate security that even Peyton's most desperate influencer fans couldn't penetrate. The system was finally closed, the vulnerabilities patched, and the predators were left to starve in the world they had poisoned. I spent my evenings walking through local parks, my bruised ribs finally knitting back together under a sky that didn't feel like a ceiling. One night, a cousin named Abby messaged me from a burner account saying, Peyton lost her apartment and Brenda is blaming everyone but herself. But I finally see what you saw. I didn't type a reply, instead hitting the delete button with a steady hand as I muttered to myself, Seeing the truth is their burden now. Not mine. I am Darcy J. Sterling. And I have learned that the most effective logistics system is the one that removes toxic waste before it can contaminate the whole structure. My life is no longer a shared account or a family dividend. It is a quiet, independent territory where the only heart monitor that matters is the one beating steadily in my own chest. Thank you for following my journey from the ICU to this new, silent horizon. My name is Darcy J. Sterling. And if this story taught me anything, it is that blood may be thick, but peace is far more precious. If you believe in standing up for your own life and setting boundaries that no one can cross, please like this video and subscribe to hear more stories of resilience. Your support helps me keep this space safe for everyone who is still fighting to find their own way out. Goodbye for now. And remember that you are the only one who truly owns your future.